I hadn't planned on staying long that evening. It was one of those casual visits, the kind where you drop by your friend's place just to hang out for a bit, maybe share a drink, maybe talk about nothing in particular. But when I arrived, his mom opened the door instead. She smiled when she saw me, that kind of smile that doesn't feel rehearsed but soft and genuine. She looked comfortable, dressed in a light cardigan over a plain top, her hair tied back loosely as though she'd been at home all day and hadn't thought much about appearances. And yet, there was something about her that made me notice a quiet grace in the way she carried herself. "Come in," she said warmly, stepping aside. The house felt different that night. The lights were dimmed in the living room, just one lamp glowing in the corner. The faint scent of coffee lingered in the air, mixed with something floral. Maybe her perfume, maybe a candle that had burned out hours ago. It gave the place a hushed, comforting atmosphere, like I'd stepped into a pocket of stillness. Her son, my friend, called down from upstairs, his voice muffled. "I'll be down in a minute," which, from experience, meant at least 20. I laughed quietly to myself and sank into the couch, adjusting to the calm. She set aside the book she'd been reading, placing her glasses on top of it, and joined me in the living room. I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe polite small talk, or the kind of distant chatter adults sometimes make with their kids' friends. But she didn't treat me that way. She sat across from me, legs crossed neatly, her hands folded on her lap, and she looked at me with a kind of attentiveness I wasn't used to. "How have you been?" she asked. Simple words, but her tone made them feel like more than routine courtesy. I told her about classes, about how busy things had been, how sometimes I wasn't sure where I was headed. She listened, actually listened, her eyes following mine, nodding slightly, smiling when I said something lighthearted. It wasn't forced. It felt human. The room itself played into it, I think. The soft ticking of the wall clock filled the pauses, the kind of steady rhythm that makes you more aware of silence. Shadows stretched across the ceiling, shifting whenever the lamp's shade trembled from the faint draft. And there she was across from me, her presence calm, steadying. I found myself noticing details I hadn't before. The way her hair loosened from the tie at the back of her neck. The faint trace of tiredness beneath her eyes, softened by how kind her expression was. The way her posture seemed relaxed, but there was still an elegance in the way she held herself. I didn't think much of it at the time, or at least I tried not to. It was just an ordinary visit, just me waiting for my friend to come downstairs. But something about the way the house felt that evening, and the way she looked at me as if my words mattered, it settled into me. Quietly, almost unnoticed. But I'd remember it later. It surprised me how quickly the conversation started to flow. Usually when I'm talking with someone older, there's this polite formality that hangs in the air, a careful distance. But with her, it didn't feel that way. She had a way of leaning in slightly when I spoke, as if every word I said carried weight. And when she answered, her voice was calm, measured, carrying that quiet confidence of someone who had lived a little more, seen a little more. She asked about my studies first, and when I shrugged off my own half-serious complaints about deadlines and late nights, she laughed softly. Not the kind of laugh you give out of politeness, but something warmer, a sound that seemed to settle into the room like a melody. "What about you?" I asked, trying to turn the spotlight back on her. "Do you still read a lot?" "I always see books around here." Her eyes lit up, the way people's eyes do when you touch on something that truly belongs to them. She leaned back slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and said, "I try to. Life gets in the way, but I think I go a little crazy without books." We talked about stories then, the ones we loved, the ones we wished we had time to revisit. Somewhere in the middle of it, the conversation shifted without us noticing. From books to regrets. From regrets to dreams. She told me about how she had once wanted to travel more, to live in another country for a while before settling down. She smiled when she said it, but there was something behind her smile, a flicker of a what-if that never quite left her. And I found myself telling her things I usually don't tell anyone. How sometimes I felt out of place among people my own age, like I was always watching life rather than living it. She didn't dismiss it, didn't tell me I was too young to think that way. She just nodded, her eyes steady on mine, as though she understood exactly what I meant. There were moments where the conversation slipped into laughter, the kind where your guard drops without realizing it. I made some clumsy joke about how students practically live on instant noodles, and she laughed so fully that her hand went briefly to her chest, her head tilting back. The sound had stayed with me, but there were also moments of quiet, pauses that didn't feel like interruptions, but like the natural rhythm of something deeper. The kind of silence where you notice the little things, the faint trace of her perfume, the way the lamplight softened the curve of her cheek, how her eyes lingered a fraction of a second longer than necessary when they met mine. It felt easy, almost too easy, as if we'd known each other longer than we actually had. Sitting there in that still living room, with the muted tick of the clock and the low hum of her voice, I realized I wasn't just passing time while waiting for my friend. I was drawn in. The conversation drifted, as conversations often do when they've gone on long enough to slip past the surface. She spoke about choices she'd made in her life. Not in a regretful way, exactly, but with that quiet honesty of someone who knows how time changes you. I think, she said softly, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, that there are always parts of ourselves we tuck away. For family, for responsibilities, for what people expect. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I'd been braver. I didn't know what to say at first. The honesty in her words caught me off guard. I sat there, leaning back against the couch, my hand resting on my knee. And maybe she noticed the hesitation in my silence, because her eyes flicked back to mine, searching, as if to see how I'd take her confession. Before I could answer, she shifted slightly where she sat, turning toward me. And then, so casually it might have been nothing at all, her hand came to rest on my leg. It wasn't bold. It wasn't even deliberate looking. Just a light placement of her palm against the side of my thigh, the way someone might touch a friend in the middle of a serious thought. But I felt it instantly. The warmth of her skin through the denim of my jeans. The gentle weight of her hand, not pressing, just resting there. I froze. My heart quickened, thudding against my ribs as though it might give me away. I kept my eyes on hers, waiting for some acknowledgement, some flicker that she knew what she was doing. But she just kept speaking, her voice calm, steady, almost thoughtful. "It's strange," she murmured, "how quickly years pass. You think you'll have time to figure it all out, and then one day you realize you've already made the choices that shaped your life." Her thumb shifted slightly, the faintest movement, like a natural reflex. I couldn't tell if it was intentional. I couldn't tell if she even realized it. And yet, that single gesture, that small pressure of her touch, sent a ripple through me. I tried to focus on her words, to keep my breathing steady, but every part of me was aware of that contact. The heat of it, the unspoken meaning it might, or might not carry. When I finally managed to respond, my voice sounded lower, quieter than before. Maybe being brave doesn't have to mean big choices. Maybe it's the small ones, too. The ones we don't even realize we're making in the moment. Her eyes softened, holding mine. She didn't move her hand right away. And in that stretch of silence, the air between us seemed charged with something fragile and undefined. I wasn't sure if she noticed what she had done, or if she noticed too much, but I knew I'd never forget the feeling of that casual touch. How something so small could change the rhythm of a room, the rhythm of my own heartbeat. The longer her hand stayed there, the more the room seemed to change. Nothing else shifted. The clock ticked on. The lamplight hummed softly. The shadows lay still across the walls. But inside me, everything felt different. Every second stretched, slow and heavy, as though time itself had taken notice of us. I tried not to stare at her hand, though I could feel its warmth seeping through the fabric of my jeans, anchoring me in a place between comfort and unease. My chest tightened, not in fear, but in the dizzying awareness that something was happening, or at least might be happening, and neither of us was acknowledging it aloud. She continued speaking, her voice steady but slower now, as though the words were carrying more weight than they should. I caught fragments of what she was saying about how people adapt, how life never follows the plan you think it will. But I wasn't really hearing them. I was listening instead to the cadence of her voice, the softness of it, how it seemed to fill the room in ways silence couldn't. And then, finally, she drew her hand back, slowly, deliberately, as if she had just remembered where it had been. She smoothed her cardigan against her lap, her eyes flicking toward me for the briefest second before darting away again. The absence of her touch was as strong as the presence of it had been. The space where her hand had rested felt suddenly cold, exposed. And I couldn't help but wonder, had it really been casual? Or had she felt the same tension humming in the air between us? Our conversation faltered then, settling into long pauses. Not uncomfortable silences, exactly, but charged ones. Every glance held longer than it should. Every breath seemed louder. The air itself felt thick, like the room was holding its breath with us. She shifted slightly in her seat, crossing her legs again, her eyes trained on the floor for a moment before lifting back to mine. When they did, there was something in them, a flicker of hesitation, or maybe recognition. The kind of look that says more than words ever could, yet disappears the second you try to name it. I want to speak, to ask if she'd meant it, to admit how my heart was racing, how I couldn't shake the heat of her touch. But the words caught in my throat, and I could see the same restraint mirrored in her. Neither of us dared step past the invisible line. Instead, she gave me a small, almost nervous smile, the corners of her mouth lifting just enough to soften the tension without erasing it. And I returned it, though my chest still ached with all the things I didn't say. The silence lingered, not empty, not awkward, but heavy with everything unspoken. And in that wait, I realized, sometimes it isn't the words or even the actions that change the course of things. Sometimes it's the pauses, the moments when you both feel something you cannot name and choose, for now, not to break it. After that pause, our voices softened without either of us deciding it should be so. The earlier laughter, the easy rhythm of conversation, faded into something quieter, something more fragile. She leaned back slightly into the couch cushions, her arms folding loosely across her stomach. Her gaze wandered toward the lamp, then to the framed photographs on the shelf, before finally settling back on me. When she spoke, her words came slowly, like she was choosing them with care. "You know," she said, almost under her breath, "sometimes I feel like I've disappeared into everyone else's life, into being someone's wife, someone's mom, but not really just me." The admission hung there between us, heavy and unguarded. She gave a small laugh afterward, though it sounded more like an attempt to soften the truth than anything else. Her eyes glimmered, not with tears, but with something close, the weight of years lived for others. I didn't move, didn't want to break the moment. My chest ached with the quiet vulnerability in her voice. I'd never thought of her that way before. Always so put together, always the kind of person who seemed to have everything handled. But now, she looked human, deeply human. I swallowed, my own voice low when I finally spoke. "I think I understand that more than you'd expect." Her eyebrows lifted slightly, her head tilting, curious, encouraging. I hesitated, then continued. "Sometimes I feel like I don't fit where I'm supposed to. Like everyone my age is moving so fast, chasing things I don't even know if I want. And I end up feeling outside of it. Like I'm waiting to catch up, or maybe just waiting for something different entirely." Her expression softened, her lips parting as if to say something, but she didn't. Instead, she just looked at me, really looked in a way that made me feel both exposed and seen. For a long moment, we sat in that quiet. The hum of the house filled the space around us, the faint creak of wood, the whisper of air in the vents, the steady tick of the clock. And yet, none of it felt louder than the silence we were sharing. Finally, she leaned forward, resting her elbows lightly on her knees, her hands folding together. "It's a lonely thing, isn't it?" she whispered. "Being surrounded by people, but still feeling invisible." The word struck something inside me, something I hadn't been able to name for myself until she said it aloud. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah," I breathed. "Exactly that. She gave me a look then, not pitying, not detached, but full of recognition. Like for once, neither of us had to pretend. That moment, I think, was closer than any touch could have been. It was as if we had both quietly admitted how much we longed to be seen. And for the first time, we weren't alone in it. The air between us felt different after that. Heavier, but not in a suffocating way. More like the weight of something waiting to be acknowledged. She leaned back again, letting out a breath that sounded almost like relief, her eyes lingering on me in a way that made my chest tighten. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, side by side, the quiet hum of the house surrounding us. Then, without warning, she reached out. It wasn't dramatic. Her hand simply moved toward mine, maybe at first to emphasize something she was about to say. But when her fingers brushed against the back of my hand, they didn't pull away. Instead, they settled there, light at first, then gradually firmer, until her palm covered mine completely. My heart jumped. Her skin was warm, softer than I expected, her touch steady in contrast to the way my pulse quickened. I looked down at her hands, then back up at her. She didn't say anything, just the smallest shift of her thumb against my knuckles, a gentle stroke that felt deliberate. The sound of my own breathing filled my ears. I wanted to speak, to ask her what this meant, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was feel the slow burn of her hand holding mine, the subtle pressure of her thumb tracing circles as if she were trying to memorize the shape of me. And then she leaned closer. Not much, just enough that her shoulder brushed mine, just enough that I caught the scent of her perfume more clearly, warm and faintly floral. The touch of her sleeve against my arm sent a shiver through me. She tilted her head, her hair falling slightly forward, and for a moment I thought she might rest it against my shoulder. My chest ached at the thought, at how badly I wanted her to. I turned slightly toward her, caught in the pull of it all. Her eyes met mine, and there it was, that hesitation, that unspoken something, hovering right at the edge of becoming more. Time slowed. My body leaned instinctively closer, just a fraction, as if the space between us was too heavy to hold. And then, footsteps above. The sharp creak of the floorboards upstairs. Her son moving around, maybe heading toward the staircase. She pulled back quickly, though not abruptly, her hand slipping from mine like water through my fingers. The warmth disappeared, leaving my skin tingling in its absence. She sat straighter, adjusting her cardigan, her eyes darting toward the ceiling as though to steady herself. I exhaled, realizing only then how tightly I'd been holding my breath. When her gaze returned to me, it carried something unspoken, apology, maybe, or acknowledgement. She gave the faintest smile, soft and unsure, before looking away. The moment was gone, but the echo of it, the closeness we had shared in those silent seconds, lingered in me like a secret I wasn't ready to let go. The sound of movement upstairs faded again, leaving the house in its familiar hush. But something inside me had changed. The closeness we'd just shared still clung to the air, invisible but undeniable, like heat that lingers after a flame has been blown out. She stood first, smoothing her cardigan as though that small motion might cover the tremor in her hands. I rose too, uncertain, my body still buzzing with the memory of her touch. "Well," she said softly, her voice carrying a steadiness that didn't quite match the look in her eyes. "Thank you for keeping me company. It was nice." "Yeah," I replied, my voice lower than I meant it to be. "It was." She gave me a smile then, smaller than the one she had offered earlier, but warmer somehow, more personal. She walked me toward the door, her steps quiet on the wooden floor, and I followed, trying to think of something to say that wouldn't sound clumsy or too much. At the doorway, she paused. The porch light spilled in, soft against her features, and for a moment she just looked at me. Not in the casual way you look at a guest as they leave, but with a kind of pause that made my chest tighten. Her hand lifted slightly, hesitated, then found my arm. Just a gentle squeeze near my elbow. Nothing bold, nothing that could be mistaken if anyone had seen it. But the warmth of her fingers settled into me as though they'd found a place to belong. "Take care of yourself," she said, her tone tender, almost protective. I nodded, unable to look away from her. You too. For a heartbeat, it felt like we were suspended there, her hand on my arm, her eyes meeting mine with a softness I'd never forget. And then, just as gently as it had come, the moment passed. She let go, her hand retreating back to her side, her smile folding into something lighter, easier, as though she'd just remembered who we were supposed to be. I stepped outside, the night air cool against my skin. She stayed at the doorway, watching me go, her figure framed by the soft glow of the lamp inside. I turned once before walking away, and she was still there, her expression unreadable, but her presence unmistakably warm. As I made my way down the quiet street, my thoughts spun. How something so small, her hand resting casually on my leg, her fingers brushing mine, the silent pauses we shared, could change the way I saw everything. I knew nothing had been said outright. Nothing had happened that couldn't be explained away as ordinary. And yet, it hadn't been ordinary at all. It had been something else, something fragile, delicate, impossible to name, but impossible to forget. That night, lying in bed, I realized it wasn't the touch itself that stayed with me. It was the way she'd looked at me in the silence afterward, like she'd seen me, really seen me, and let herself be seen in return. And in that quiet exchange, I knew the memory of her hand, so casually placed, would live in me far longer than it had lasted.